Well, good evening, vinyl community, Beatles community, and everybody else out there. Hi, it's Matt. I'm back for another video. I was able to do another one a little quicker this week than I did last time. I think it was like almost a 2-week spread between my last video and the ones prior to that. So I had some time, so I thought I'd try to get a couple done today for you. And as you can see from the title of this video, this is basically a response video to Mean Mr. Mayo, Joe, and Ed from the King's Court. Joe had a really good video he did not too long ago that he spoke about the Beatles and Elvis and their significance today, their sales, their impact on not only the music listening public, but young people and our younger people getting into them as much, and also the sales of memorabilia and record albums and whatnot. So Joe had a really good video and gave his opinion about it, and if you read some of the responses in Joe's thread there, you'll see I gave a couple of responses, and Joe and I pretty much saw it basically the same way. And then I watched Ed's from the King Court, and he did a nice response. Ed really did a good job explaining his take on the whole situation between Elvis and the Beatles and their significance. So I thought I would do my little response to that. So I hope you'll enjoy this. I'll try not to make it too long. I think my last video about Beatle albums that were good memories for you was like 30 minutes, and so I'll try to cut this one down a little bit. And as you can see from the albums I'm holding in my hand, I'm holding two of my favorite albums by each of the artists that Joe and Ed spoke about. And as you can see from my t-shirt today and from my little hat that I wore last time, I put a little button on it in tribute to Ed's family, the King's Court. I got that at the last Fest for Beatle fans. I showed it in one of my earlier videos. But I love Elvis. I'm a big Elvis fan. Growing up, I didn't dislike Elvis, but I was so into the Beatles as a young boy, as you know, and coming into my preteens and teenage years and beyond. I was just, if you watch any of my videos, you know what a Beatles fanatic I am, and I'm proud to say I am. I love their music. But Elvis was always there. I always knew people enjoyed him in the periphery of my life, and I liked many songs that I heard by Elvis, and I became a fan of it as the years went by and I grew into adulthood. My fandom for Elvis grew more and more to the point that I consider him one of my probably top 5 or 10 artists of all time, if I had to make a list. So I just want to talk a little bit about my theory on it, and as I do, I'll just hold up a couple of albums here and there of my favorites by both of them, and these are two certainly favorites of mine by both Elvis and the Beatles, two of my favorites here. I want to tend to lean towards what Joe said about, I think for me there's two aspects to why Elvis may not have the same significance in 2017 as the Beatles do. This is just my take on it, and the two main things I can come up with are the fact that, one, I think there's a little bit more oversaturation with Elvis in the market in the last 20 to 30 years, well, maybe even since his passing. And there's nothing against that. I buy Elvis stuff, I buy t-shirts, I buy books. I have a couple Elvis dolls back here I can show you someday. So I do like Elvis, and I like collecting the memorabilia, and I certainly love collecting his albums. They're fantastic, and he has so much great music. And if you explore a little bit, you'll learn, as I did as I grew up and got older, when I really started to get into Elvis, that he really has some fine music out there. And not just the 50s stuff. The 50s stuff is great. I love it. And this is, one of my favorite albums of his. I know it's the Golden Records, but all his big 50s hits are on this. I love them, every one of them. And not only does he have great stuff in the 50s, but if you really search and dig, he has great material in the 60s and going into the 70s. He really does. He has great music. But the oversaturation, I think, so much with his name and his likeness and his logo is on so many products and licensed so extravagantly, I think, just my opinion, that I think he's just a little bit oversaturated over the last 30 years or so. Not that the Beatles don't have products and memorabilia and books put out by them, but if I had to guess, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I would say Elvis has more licensing, more saturation, more out there, putting his name and likeness on different products to buy and purchase and whatnot. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just one of Matt's personal theories as to why Elvis may not be as significant today or not be drawing as much for his memorabilia and his records as the Beatles are. That's theory number one for me. A little bit oversaturation, and I don't want to even, I hate to even use the term too much Elvis, because to me there's not too much Elvis. I love Elvis, and the more the better for me. But I'll just use that generally, too much Elvis. And maybe it's hurt him and his image a little bit with the younger people coming up, the high school, college age, and maybe a little older in their 20s, of really getting into him and enjoying him, because I think many of them see him as, the silly, 50s guy, or the guy who in his later years was wearing the white jumpsuit and had a little bit of a gut on him or something, and they see all these crazy Elvis impersonators out there who look so garish and flamboyant and with bad wigs and probably weigh 100 pounds more than Elvis ever did, and trying to squeeze themselves into these jumpsuits, and they go out and present themselves as an Elvis impersonator, and it's just embarrassing. It just takes away from the image of Elvis, because that wasn't Elvis. Elvis was a great performer from day one right to the end, right to his last show there in June of 1977. I just think he was a fantastic performer and always poured his heart out, gave his heart, and really cared about the fans and did his best. And so I think some of these factors with these crazy impersonators, some are good, but I mean, there's a lot of bad ones out there, folks. And I think the oversaturation a little bit has hurt Elvis. And for that, I think that's reason number one. A couple more albums I'll pick up to show you my favorites. These are my favorites by these artists, so that's why I'm showing them. Elvis's Son Sessions, obviously one of my favorite Elvises of all time, and Beatles' Rubber Soul. The next theory I want to talk about is the theory of the actual music itself and how it's taken by the younger generations, or the generations coming up the pike, so to speak. Obviously the original fans of Elvis love him. The original fans of the Beatles love them. Then you get into the second generation fans, the fans that maybe were around in the late 70s, early 80s, who weren't really around or even born when the Beatles were really big, or even when Elvis was alive, but they've become mega fans of these two acts, And but I think beyond that, what's happened is the Beatles' music has held up, and Joe's talked about this a little bit. This is not to put Elvis's music down. I love Elvis. I think this is one of the best albums of all time right here. Best rock and roll albums you can ever get. It's definitely in the top 5 or so of Elvis's Son Sessions. And I love his music, but for some reason I have to agree with Joe, and I think Ed might have spoke about this a little bit, is that the music is a little more dated. It doesn't hold up as much. And when I say that, it's not to put the music down. It's wonderful music, but it's a little bit dated in the sense that if I take an album like, this is another one of my favorite Beatle albums of all time, Revolver, okay? Take Revolver and take this one and give it to a younger person, high school or college age, I think they're going to be more apt to go for something like this, or for Rubber Soul, or Sgt. Pepper, or Abbey Road, or the White Album, or even maybe some of the early stuff of the Beatles that's a little more, early rock and roll style, but definitely their mid to later period. I think you start playing this stuff for a younger person, try to turn them on to the Beatles, they're going to jump right at it. And this stuff is timeless, folks. You all know that. This stuff goes on and just, it's like it was recorded yesterday. It's just so fantastic, and the genius of it is unbelievable. Whereas an album like this is another one of my favorite Elvis albums. I love this album. This is the one that came out after his 68 comeback special. This is the one that came out in 1969, Elvis, from Elvis in Memphis. Folks, I recommend this album highly to any fans of good music and rock and roll. This is a fantastic album. However, it's a little, I won't say dated, I hate to keep using that term, but if you understand where I'm coming from, if you play this album for a young person today, and then play something like this for a young person today, I just think they're going to be more apt to lean towards this. This is more accessible to them. This sounds more modern and upbeat and current, if they don't know who it is or when it was recorded. But when they do listen to an album like this, yeah, I have a feeling they're going to probably turn away from it a little more, or be more apt to turn away from it, because it is a little bit dated. It doesn't have some of the modern sounds and some of the melodies that we see in some of the Beatles mid to late period. It's a fantastic album though, but again, it's just the sounds of it, even though it's a wonderful album, definitely one of the best in rock and roll history, as this one is, still when you hold them side by side, they're both great in their own right, and for when they were recorded, they were great. But when you take it into 2017 and nowadays in the 2000s, and you start, throwing this type of music at people, I think the younger people of today are going to think this is a little more dated and turn away from it, whereas this is more accessible. Okay? So basically, that's really my two theories, is that you have what I believe to be a little more oversaturation of Elvis, his licensing and likeness in the market today, the music market, memorabilia market, whereas the Beatles, although they are one of the most licensed and produced product-wise musical artists out there, I don't think it's as much as Elvis. I just think Elvis, it's a little more. And also the music factor. Again, here's another great Elvis album from the early 70s, one of his best, probably I say one of his top 3 albums of all time. And this only came out within like a couple of years, like 5 or 6 years before he passed away. So almost to the end in the 70s, Elvis was still putting out great albums. And this is a fantastic album. However, when you hold it up to something like this is going to be more accessible to young people today. Look what's happening with Sgt. Pepper coming out in a few weeks, the 50th anniversary, and all the hoopla about the Super Deluxe edition, the double LP edition with outtakes, the double CD edition. You can just tell this is going to be a monster. Just from, if you go on the internet or read the news or listen to what's happening out there in the world of Beatles and fans, the hype, it's not hype, I mean it's being hyped, but the hype is real. This is an album that's timeless. That's I heard the 2 outtakes, and I heard the 2 remixed songs of Sgt. Pepper with a little help from my friends, and I was like blown away how great and fresh they sounded. It made me just want to hear this album all over again. It's almost going to be like I say hear it all over again. Of course we want to hear it all over again, but I think we're going to rediscover this album. I think with this remixing, it's going to sound fantastic. It's just going to be unbelievable. And this album, I love it. It's a great album, but I can't imagine if this, if Elvis's estate came out that they were making a big, release of this, and it was going to be in a super deluxe edition with 5, 6 CDs and a DVD and all that. Yeah, I think it would sell to the core Elvis fans out there, and some are young and some are older. But I think overall, when you really look at it, I think, the Beatles they're more timeless, if that word makes sense, timeless. They cover all genres, from the older fans, the original Beatle fans, to the second generation fans, to the fans up to today, the young people who are in grade school right now discovering them through their parents and grandparents, kids in college that are putting on these albums. Just so, people who are young and just starting to get into music are putting on these albums, are being influenced by these albums. Whereas I think Elvis, unfortunately, it's much less. He's not being as promoted, to the younger generation as he should be. I think Elvis should be. I think Elvis should be just as strong today as the Beatles are today, with a group of fans and young fans coming down the road here that really love and appreciate his music. But I just think right now, and I think it could happen, I don't think Elvis is dead and gone, or, someone, I forget who it was in one of their videos, said that maybe in a few years, Elvis was just going to be, once his original fans pass away, he's just going to be forgotten. I don't believe that for a second, folks. I just think everything goes in ebbs and flows and cycles. And I think right now we may be in a cycle where, with the younger generation and with, people getting into Elvis and his memorabilia and records being very highly sought after. Maybe that's in a little lull right now, but I think he's going to come back. I think eventually Elvis, you'll see him back again, bigger than ever, with fans and new generations discovering him. All it takes is, like some type of pop culture event to happen that puts him back in the spotlight, that puts him back in the social consciousness, so to speak, and he'll be back on top again, believe me, in the sense that his material music will be appreciated by a whole new generation of fans coming up. I predict it will happen. And as for these guys right here, well, I don't think we need to worry. I don't see them ever going into that lull that Elvis seems to be in right now. I see the Beatles just always being strong in the social consciousness. I always see them being handed down, so to speak, through the generations to the next generation. I mean, my parents, like I told you, if you watch my last video about memories, they were a little too old to be into the Beatles, but they had the foresight enough to buy me a couple of records when I was a little boy, 3 years old in '64. So I consider myself a first generation fan because I've been aware of them and listened to them and loved them since they were first here in America in '64. But I also passed it on to my children in the late '80s and '90s when my two boys started to grow. I turned them on to the Beatles and got them into it, and they love the band. And now I see it slightly with my 2-year-old grandson, believe it or not. He likes a couple of different Beatles songs that he's heard, and he's been requesting them to hear them over and over again now. And they are, he loves She Loves You, he loves All You Need Is Love, and he likes Yellow Submarine. So there you go, a little 2-year-old born in 2015, and he's asking for Beatles music. I don't know, maybe if I, play him a little bit of Elvis, get some Elvis going for him, a little Hound Dog or Jailhouse Rock, I bet you I could get him boogie into that too. So, hey, there's still hope, and Elvis will be back. He'll always be with us. His music will certainly always be with us. And that's pretty much it, folks. That's my response to Joe and Ed. Hope you enjoyed this little quick 16, 17-minute video. Beatles and Elvis. You can't beat them. The greatest of all time. Have a good night. God bless. Take care.